people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn. Let's talk about the fight. Big fights that are built up over time, like this one, seldom ever deliver on the night. That's saying that a fight like Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr., for example, that was built up over 5 years when it finally happened, was really all one-way traffic. There were no ebbs and flows. It was really just one guy beating up on the other. Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Davis, I would say, was built up over 2, maybe 3 years, but when it happened, same deal. It was really just one guy beating up on the other. Whereas this fight between Chris and Conor, we can say was built up over a little over 2 years, maybe a bit longer than that. But when it finally happened, man alive, did it deliver. Back and forth, thrills and spills. Being honest, I didn't expect it to be that good. Going in, I didn't expect to get what we got yesterday. Conor Benn got off to a very aggressive start, much to his detriment. A lot of nervous energy, a lot of movement for the sake of movement, leaping hooks, leaping backhands. He looked like he was going for an early finish. Where Chris was comparatively more reserved, the more experienced fighter of the two and the noticeably bigger fighter of the two, wasn't burning through his energy reserves like Conor was. No, Chris was more calm, composed, at times looking a step behind Conor from how composed he was. The first half of the fight, Chris looked flat. Looked like he was a step behind Conor Benn, who was getting in with those hard left hooks and hard backhands that were having a noticeable effect on Chris. We can say that very early in the contest, it was established Conor can hurt Chris, even though he's the smaller fighter moving up. The left hook was a particularly effective punch for Conor Benn. He hurt Chris with that punch in the exchange, in the pocket, several times throughout the contest. In the first half and the second, the left hook. But as the contest progresses and the fight wears on, towards the middle, you see Chris Eubank Jr. liven up, let his hands go, step into his punches, put them together, backing off young Conroy, who was visibly gassed in spots, visibly spent, having burnt through all that energy in the first half of the fight. He noticeably slowed down in the second, where you can say Chris took over. Staying composed in the first half of the fight paid dividends in the second half of the fight for Chris Eubank Jr., sporting a cut over his right eye as a result of a clash of heads. Took a lot of punches throughout the course of this fight. Even in rounds that he won, they both did. But the cut, the scratches, the scrapes, the swelling, Chris really was wearing Conor's handiwork on his face. Now this fight and its aesthetic, its outcome, didn't really boil down to technique or strategy so much as willpower. Who had more desire to win in tandem with who had the energy? Who had more to give towards the back end of the fight? Big problem with Conor's strategy is trying for all those big punches at the start, loading up on them. You're burning through twice as much energy as Chris is, carrying more weight than he's ever carried while he does it, because as we all know, Conor Benn usually campaigns as a welterweight, where this fight was fought at middle. Burning through your energy reserves with the punches that you land and the punches that you don't. Twice as much with the punches that you don't. I lost count of how many times Conor Benn hurt Chris Eubank Jr., rattled his cage in this fight, but because his approach was so frenzied, he just couldn't put it all together the way that he needed to finish him, because there was so many times in this fight where Chris looked like he was ready to go. That's what I mean when I say that this one doesn't really boil down to strategy. Very little boxing. This was a brawl, and towards the back end of the fight, as Conor Benn is visibly gassed, that opened the door for Chris Eubank Jr. to take over and lay into the smaller, less experienced fighter, backing him into the ropes, letting go of punches and bunches. Some are getting in and some aren't, but because Conor's not responding.
He's just blocking.
For long spells, it was Chris Eubank Jr. stepping into his punches, backing Conor into the ropes, letting punches go. Conor's hanging tough, he's hanging on, but not doing enough to steal the round from Chris Eubank Jr. There were rounds where Chris won it just off of activity alone.
And the last two rounds.
The 11th and the 12th being a particularly dramatic round where Conor tried to muster up whatever he had left, whatever he had to fight Chris off, but ultimately, that's a round that I gave Chris.
Initially went with Conor Benn to win the fight, though. Having seen it, we can wholeheartedly say Chris did enough. Chris did more than enough to win the contest. The most that you could give Conor, I think, is 5 rounds, and 5 is being generous.
Generous because I counted at least one swing round somewhere in there, one round, maybe 2, that were difficult to score. It wasn't quite clear who won it. And if you give both of those rounds to Conor...
It was 7-5 Eubank.
I think it was 7-5. Both guys thoroughly entertained the large crowd that gathered.
They delivered.
Adding to the legacy that their fathers left behind. Nigel Benn, Chris Eubank Sr., who decided to come, who decided to be there.
Few post-fight comments from the fighters. I knew I was capable of that, said Chris Eubank Jr. I just needed someone to bring it out of me. I didn't expect he'd be the guy, but the fact that our fathers did what they did all those years ago, it brings out a different soul, a different spirit in you.
Well, what would make this fight different from any other fight that Chris has had, or any other fight that Conor has had?
The history.
The family name. What it means to be in there with a Benn, if you're a Eubank, and what it means to be in there with a Eubank, if you're a Benn.
Conor Benn, who said, we always knew Chris was a good fighter. All the fighting talk is fighting talk. He's a good fighter. I would love to avenge that loss. My next move is either Mario Barrios for the WBC World title or a rematch with Chris.
As it pertains to a rematch with Chris, His Excellency Turki El Sheikh is hoping to stage a Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn rematch as soon as September. Back at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, Eubank and Benn have already agreed terms and are contracted for the rematch as they signed a 2-fight deal.
I looked at Chris Senior and I said to him, grabbed him by the neck and I said, mate, I'm so happy you're here. I'm so happy you turn up. You know, because outside of everything else, outside of all the noise and the promotion and the fight, your relationship with your dad never goes. That's always there. That's long standing. That's without boxing. You know, what's boxing? You know, what is it? You know, because I'd pick the relationship with my dad over boxing any day of the week. You know, so to see them two, if this has brought them together, God, that's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, I think maybe Junior should come down a little bit lower rather than Conor Benn coming up 2 weight classes. You know, I was baffled. I mean, we knew Chris Eubank's weight all week, right? I knew it at the check weight. I knew it the day after. We knew what he woke up this morning, and he was absolutely spot on this morning, and he was fine. Yesterday, he was tight at the weight. He's always tight at the weight. He's made it the last 5 times. He messed up. He got there an hour late. He could have made it comfortably, but they just ballsed up. That's it. No one ever said, apart from his dad, do you think it's dangerous for Conor Benn to be moving up 2 divisions and fighting someone the size of Eubank? And I think, honestly, the contract, and you guys have got to remember as well, this contract was not a contract that was negotiated between Matchroom and Chris Eubank Jr. This was a contract that was negotiated by the Ring magazine and seller and Chris Eubank individually. And we negotiated our contract individually. Ben Shalom, Chris Eubank, Maz, whatever his name is, they accepted those terms, right? And that's the art of a contract, and the plan is to abide by those terms. So
now over to another talking point in association with this fight, the weight. I saw a Twitter user that goes by the name Aldani say Eddie Hearn and Team Benn tried their best to fight the worst, drained version of Eubank Jr. at the age of 35 and still lost. Excellent parliamentary procedure by Eubank Jr.
I look at comments like that one as a glaring example of how people's feelings towards someone or something tend to override their logic, their hierarchy of thought. if they even have one.
He mentioned the eggs in passing, a play on words when Conor Benn himself never attributed anything to eggs, to consumption of eggs. That was the World Boxing Council that said that, not Conor. Conor himself dismissed that explanation, citing human error.
Human error in the lab where his samples were handled. That was his explanation, while some people pretend that he never provided one.
When that entire fiasco kicked off, Conor Benn released a lengthy PSA that I don't think a lot of people read through because people have notoriously low attention spans these days, and print is a dying medium.
Anybody still citing egg consumption at this point would have to be doing so from a childish need to troll either Conor Benn or those who support him, because Conor himself never said anything about eggs.
Feelings over facts. It's that kind of deal. Then claiming that Eddie Hearn and Conor Benn tried to drain Chris Eubank Jr. Chris is fighting a welterweight.
When he misses the weight and people are talking about how badly drained he is.
Missed it by 5 ounces, I believe it was, for trying to make the same weight that he made to fight Liam Williams, Liam Smith 2 times, then Camille Zeremata late last year.
Where do you think that Chris Eubank Jr. has been fighting for the last 2 or 3 years?
And the last 4 fights. Chris Eubank Jr. has not fought above middleweight since 2021. Every year thereafter, and every fight that he's had has been a middleweight contest.
If anybody's draining Chris, he's draining himself.
To fight a welterweight, because he was offered a multi-million-dollar fight with Hamza Shiraz, a multi-million-dollar fight with Canelo Alvarez.
Erislandy Lara was on the table. You could have had a title fight with him. These people make it seem so lopsided.
Citing the rehydration clause, which is in play because Chris was fighting a welterweight. A welterweight who never actually won a title at welterweight. You're essentially fighting a smaller, less experienced fighter than you are. Why is no mention being made of that?
I'm not trying to get any of you to play Conor Benn the violin. I'm trying to get you to stop playing Chris the violin. He's not a victim.
Friend of the channel, Willie Lynch II said, I doubt he being Chris Eubank Jr., gets any credit for going in drained, older, and expected to get stopped. I'm sure the haters will say he didn't take any punches to get that hard-earned victory.
There goes that drained word again.
Chris wouldn't have been subject to any weight stipulations of any kind if he would have been fighting another middleweight like himself. He wanted to fight somebody who was smaller than he was.
How much credit are we supposed to give him for that?
Now, there is some intrinsic value in Chris Eubank Jr. beating Conor Benn in terms of the family legacy, that no member of the Benn family holds a victory over any member of the Eubank family. I suppose that is worth something intrinsically, but in the greater scheme of things, the question is, how much credit are you supposed to give Chris for beating a guy who's smaller than he is?
How much credit did you give Gervonta Davis for bringing up Hugo Ruiz and Jesus Cuellar and Hector Luis Garcia, Lamont Roach? How much credit did you give him?
How much credit did you give Errol Spence Jr. when he fought Mikey Garcia, who campaigned 2 divisions south of welter at lightweight?
And that fight was a lot less competitive than this one. That fight was all one-way traffic, whereas this one...
Chris got hurt. He got hurt multiple times. He got rocked by a guy who campaigns 2 divisions south of middle, so that when he ekes out the win, when he gets it, how much credit are you supposed to give him?
Well, yesterday's fight was a thoroughly entertaining fight. I think that was a British classic, but I haven't recalibrated my perspective on it based on how exciting it was.
Illogical.
It's just illogical. Credit to Chris Eubank Jr. for winning the fight, but I mitigate how much credit I'm going to give him for fighting a guy who's less experienced and naturally smaller than he is, having to go through what he went through to get that win.
Turning down fights with guys at his own weight, guys his own size, to fight this one.
You're damn right I'm going to mitigate how much credit I give him. Why wouldn't I?
The rematch.
It would seem that entering into this fight, they reached a similar agreement to what Dmitry Bivol and Artur Beterbiev reached ahead of their fight.
Their fights.
This is a packaged deal. It's a 2-fight engagement. And I don't think anybody's complaining that if we can see these 2 boys do it again as soon as September, you can sign me up.
They love it.
Now, the undercard was a bit forgettable. You know, Chris Billum Smith versus that guy, Anthony Yard versus Lyndon Arthur for the 3rd time. a badly aged Liam Beefy Smith versus Aaron McKenna, that if they are going to do a second fight as soon as September, I'd like to see a more spicy undercard.
Maybe we could get Adam Azim versus Dalton Smith on there.
How about Justice Hooney versus Fraser Clark? I could go for that.
Hooney!
Yeah, Carolyn Dubois, who's got a lot to say about Alicia Baumgartner. Why don't we get Carolyn Dubois versus Beatrice Ferreira for the IBF and WBC lightweight titles on that undercard? Because you know it's going to be a big bill. You know that's going to be a really big stage. It may be even bigger than the first one because of how much the first one delivered.
And now people know what they're getting, and they know it's worth their money.
I see no reason that the second meeting between Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn shouldn't be an even bigger engagement, and that the undercard shouldn't be even more ambitious, because this undercard was a bit forgettable.
Thank God the main event delivered.
What does Conor Benn need to do differently in a second fight so that it doesn't turn out like the first? I think he needs to figure out what to do after the left hook lands, because he had a lot of success with that punch, but after he landed it, it all kind of just got messy and fell apart.
Frenzied. He was too frenzied.
They start getting ready to do a second fight. He's getting ready to have it. They need to watch the tape back and look at how much energy he burned in the first couple of rounds. You need to calm the hell down. Maybe he will, now that he's been in there with Chris and he has those experiences to draw from. Don't burn through so much energy.
Tighten up.
Pinpoint all those moments where the left hook actually landed. Then see what it was that Chris did and why you weren't able to build on that left hook, because that left hook was a devastating punch throughout the entirety of the fight whenever Conor landed it.
There were so many moments when the left hook got in that Chris looked like he was ready to go, and what Conor needs to do is figure out what to do after that. What punch?
Where to aim and what to throw, because this past Saturday, he just couldn't put it all together, not cohesively enough to finish Chris, who was hurt quite a few times.
He needs to work on his cardio, too.
Well, not saying he doesn't, but a big part of the reason he was so badly gassed towards the tail end of the fight is because he spent so much time loading up his punches at the beginning. So that goes back to not burning through your energy reserves as soon as the opening bell sounds.
That's what he's got to do, what Chris has got to do.
Do what you did before. Use this guy's aggression against him by letting him punch himself out. You know he's going to shoot out of his corner like a bat out of hell, looking to land big punches. If he doesn't correct that mistake, you ain't got to change nothing.
Just do what you did before.
I don't think either guy's stock was hurt yesterday, but more particular to Conor Benn, who in many ways went into this weekend's contest as the villain, the bad guy, the social pariah. After the performance that he put on, in spite of the loss, I think his stock went up.
A few boo birds aside.
I think his stock went up. I think that many more people are going to tune into the rematch if there is one. And if there isn't, say he moves back down to welter, fights Mario Barrios.
Because he mentioned him.
Look, I want to say that the rematch with Chris is a much bigger fight than a title fight with Mario Barrios at 147. And I do expect to see the rematch happen because of the money.
Because of the reaction.
Just in a very general sense, in spite of Conor suffering his first professional loss yesterday, I don't think that took anything away from him. I don't think it hurt his stock. I think it raised it.
I think if he were to fight Mario Barrios, based on what I saw yesterday, he knocks Mario Barrios out.
But because the Eubank fight is the biggest fight that either of them can have right now, that's the one I think is going to happen.